Hello. In the short video, we'll look at Analyze and determine the differences between repeated paths by activity flow and repeated paths by steps. So the simplest to start with is repeated path by steps. When you do a capture, you get a series of steps. They can be named activities, they can be comments, or they can be input fields. So what the repeated paths by steps looks at is do these captures have the same input steps and are they in the same order? So it ignores your comments and your activity names, and it's a great way to identify captures that you would want to turn to a data-driven test. It actually will allow us to export the data as a CSV file. So if you think about manual tests, they may have two manual scripts, and the only difference is different data going into them. Or users may be doing a repetitive task and they have to say they go through and create some orders, they create some deliveries, they do some fulfillments. And the process of, say, the orders is different, but the process is that the fulfillments and the deliveries is very similar. It has all the same required fields. There's no variation in the data. So what we'd want to do is group those together. So we want to create a data-driven test. Now, repeated paths by activity flow is a little different. It actually looks at the named activities and finds them that have the same activities in the same order. Okay, the input data can vary, so you can have optional fields. The only thing that is compared is the actual activity flow itself. What it does is allow to find a larger group of captures that have similar, say, process level steps, create, order, fulfill, bill, but the data is different. And what happens there, we'll see, is it exports into an XLSX file, and you'll get a different folder tab for each activity. So here in Capture, I've navigated to the repeated path by steps, and you can see you can sort by more similar. If I look, I can see a sample activity flow. So this one, there's just the last one that came in had just one activity called VA1 or sales order. This one had multiple T codes. This one went from a home page to a helper to a create order to an overview. So the activity flow here is just kind of a hint, the latest one that came in. And what we can do is drill into it, and we can see these are all of the captures that have the exact same steps. So I can see who they're captured by and that, the names of them if I'm interested in. We can see the activity flows may be a little different, but what happened is they entered the same data fields. So the name of the activity may not be exactly the same, but the steps are. So that's what we can actually see here. Now when I drill into the steps, what I'll see is there was input fields for the sold to party, the shipped to party, the customer reference. So this data was entered in each one of these. But what's interesting is there was only one division used across the captures, only 3 order types, but there's 20 different customer reference numbers. So the uniqueness of the values tells me that a lot of this test, I'm doing the same order with the same number of fields. A lot of the fields don't change very much. Only the customer reference changes each time. Okay, so in this parsing of the data, we can see it makes sense this should be a data-driven test, and maybe some things like division, distribution, and sales order maybe could be hard-coded because we only had one sample of the data. Best practices, maybe I would not want to do that. But if I come back, what I can do is I can say export data, and I'll just download it. And if I open this up, Excel popped it open, so I can see for the different captures. This is the data that was entered across. And this kind of makes sense. If I generated this test case, this would be all the data that I want in my record set. CSV is easy enough to import into a record set to create a data-driven test, right? So from a test perspective, that's kind of interesting. If you look at other of these with the repeated steps, you can see some of them have larger steps, like longer processes or shorter processes, and kind of your high-level examples. Okay. Obviously, you can always do your create automation, this will do for the last one, or create the documentation. If we drill in and we look, we can see some of these had some different titles. If I wanted the documentation or the automation for a specific one, I could do it from this view here. So think about pass by steps. It doesn't matter what the activity name is, as we saw, but the same fields were entered in the UI in the same order. Obviously, low-hanging fruit for data-driven tests. So if I navigate to the repeated pass by activity flow, what this means is these activities were actually the same, but the data could vary. So this first one here looks like there's been 170 captures of just a VA1 or sales order T code. And when I drill in, I'll get a list of all of those individual captures. And then if I look at the activities, I can actually see something interesting. I can get a count. So 169 of these entered the OKCD field. 2 of them entered the sole two-party here. 151 used the sole two-party drop-down, right? So what I can see here is of these different captures, there's variations in data that was entered, right? So different order types, reference numbers, and that. So I'm seeing that there's optional data fields that were entered. So if I come over here to the sales order here, this one may be let's see what this data looks like. Oops. If I come to my activities, okay, I can see there was the home activity, there was the create sales document, there was sales office was entered once. Looks like these document types and channels were entered over 100 times each. And then for the next activity, I can see how many of the fields were entered. Now, what this tells me is that I had 3 activities. Actually, I had 4 activities, sorry. And there had some optional fields because some of this data wasn't filled out each time. But I can see, where probably I could guess these are more required fields because they exist more often. Obviously the table rows here, okay, that means they've entered more than one row order in my table. So it looks like a lot of people did order 1 line item, more people row 3, row 2, they entered multiple line items. So I can expect that data to vary a bit. So if I come back, let's go generate the data for this one and see what it looks like. And there's my Excel spreadsheet. So in this case, it's going to look a little bit different. What I can see is I have a folder tab for the create order document. So this is the different captures by name. This is the data. Notice the housetop, the caret or the shift 6. Remember, that's a skip character. So if you actually were to enter this data in your test case and pass in a skip character, it actually wouldn't fill the data there. Now if I look at my sales order overview, see I've got all my different capture names here. Now what's interesting is this capture here actually entered a net terms and had a date, where these others didn't have net terms. So by looking at Excel spreadsheet, I can kind of see when I had tests or captures that had optional data recorded or not. So this is how we get those counts on the things. So from an automation perspective, it looks like these are all pretty similar. I probably would just want to generate one test and then add the extra fields, or maybe I could take this Fiori create sales order demo, maybe that one, and then another one, say down here with this extra date here, and I would want to generate those 2 automations and merge those processes. So if you think about the activities at the largest level, they're the same. They went through the creating the order and the document, but that's an optional data. Okay, I could very quickly say, give me just a capture for that one, and I can go generate automation. And so this is the one that had the net terms and the date. If I look back at my Excel spreadsheet, say this one here had the session 1 had some different fields. Easy enough. I'm going to go generate that one also. I'll find it and generate it. So I've got similar activities, I've grouped them, and then even though I have optional data, I now have two certified processes that have automatically generated that fill in that data. So I can merge those two processes, get rid of the duplicate fields, or maybe in this case just cut and paste a few that I want, and then have a data-driven test. Now the nice thing is Certify now supports reading native Excel spreadsheets. So when you point to a spreadsheet in the requisite importer, you'll say which sheet that you want to import the data for. So I can actually bring this data directly into my Certify process and to use it to create a data-driven test. This process may have some optional fields in it, but that's fine. The skip characters will manage that automatically for me. And the nice thing is I'm creating my minimal number of tests to actually accomplish the maximum number of rows of data. And you can see here I have my little toast message. You see my process has been created. You can always go to the C tab here and you'll see who was created, the date, and if it's actually been imported also. You can also delete them from here if you want. So just a hint of some other things inside the UI that will make your life a little bit simpler. So that's the differences between our working with our captures. If we have our by activity flow, which is varying data but similar business processes, versus by steps, where we actually have the same data being entered, so it's very much a rote data-driven test. Thank you and have a great day.